Hi, I'm Nicholas Lodge, and I'd like to introduce to you my Nicholas Lodge collection by Katy Sue Designs. In this presentation, I will be showing you the steps of creating a beautiful winter rustic wedding cake using some of my collection. These are the floral components of the actual cake, and I will be using these floral components for a topper for the wedding cake, in addition a spray which is going to go onto the base board. So the spray is going to consist, first of all, of pine cones. Now I have on Katy Sue Designs on the YouTube channel, I have actually 4 full-length tutorials. So there is a full-length tutorial on the pine cones where you can actually see how to create the pine cones, both half relief, and in the case of the wedding cake, I'm using 3-dimensional pine cones. The number of components that I'm using will be on the end of the tutorial, so it will actually have a list of how many of each of the pine cones and needles and things you will need. In addition to the pine cones, which I have some already paired up for the spray, and some single pine cones, I also have some pine branches. Again, this is shown on my tutorial of using these with floral tape, and then I have the sort of icy look to tie in with the winter theme with obviously the sugar on the ends of these, which is shown on the tutorial. So those will be the pine cone and the pine needles, and those are made, this is obviously the pine cone mold. So the pine cone mold is used to make the pine cones. These are the 3 sizes, the small, the medium, and large. And so those are the first components. Secondly, I have some of these beautiful violet purple berries. Now the color, Pantone color of 2018 is a color called ultraviolet, and it's this sort of violet purple color. So what I've done is tying in with a trend, the current trend, which is this color, which will be very influential this year. I have used my holly and mistletoe, and I've used the triple berry here, and this is the triple berry from the set. And so you just would, again, watch my tutorial, my full-length tutorial of how to use this particular mold. Instead of making these in red, you would just change out to doing these in a violet purple color. So here I just modified some purple sugar paste or rolled fondant, and then I've obviously used it in exactly the same way as I showed the berry on the tutorial. I have, in addition to that, also some hydrangeas. The hydrangeas have been made in white with a little bit of a limey green color, and then pale chocolate like accent to tie in with the color from the pine cones. I have iceberg roses. These are made in an off-white with a very, very pale green center. And then also some lovely ferns. These are leather leaf ferns, and I have some 3 smaller stems and then 1 slightly larger, which will be used for the base spray. So these are the components, the floral components of the cake, and so obviously these will be used a little later on in the presentation to show how to put these together, and then we're going to be moving on to talking about the cake. So for the actual cake part of the component of the rustic winter wedding cake, I'm going to use, first of all, some cinnamon sticks. There is a full-length tutorial on Katy Sue's YouTube channel of using the winter spice. So this is my winter spice mold from part of the Nicholas Lodge collection by Katy Sue Designs. And this has got a double cinnamon stick. On the tutorial I also show how to make single cinnamon sticks, which I'm also using a couple of single ones as well. And then the citrus slice and the star anise. So all of these are covered on the tutorial, and I'm using the cinnamon stick. So what we need to do is obviously calculate the size of your cake, and then obviously then calculate how many cinnamon sticks you need. Remember, on the end of this tutorial we'll have the components used for this particular size cake. In addition to the cinnamon sticks, for the base border around the base of the larger cake, I'm actually going to use, this is the nuts and berries mold, this is the blackberry, the acorn, the half walnut, the hazelnut, and then here you have the acorn cup. Again, there is a full-length tutorial on showing how to use all of the components on this mold, and I am just using the acorn cup. But for those of you that have some of these molds, obviously it just gives you other opportunities to be able to use them during other times of year. And what I've actually done is I've made these little acorn cups, and these acorn cups are made, and I'm going to use these as a base border. This gives a very nice decorative border and ties in very nicely with that rustic look. So I'm just going to put these out of the way here, and then just talk a little bit about the cake. So the cake is actually, this is going to be a small wedding. A lot of times, you know, especially during the winter time, sometimes people have small intimate weddings like in a barn or a log cabin. So we're going with that whole rustic look. So this is actually an 8-inch cake. All right, so this is like an 8-inch size cake, which is 20 centimeters across is the base cake, 7.5 centimeters or 3 inches high. And then the top cake here is actually 4 inches or 10 centimeters across. And again, 7.5 centimeters or 3 inches high. I've offset the top cake, so as you can see that this is a little bit towards the back. Because I'm going to be putting a cinnamon stick, so I'm going to create the effect like almost a cinnamon stick basket, a topper. What I would recommend, this part I would recommend using as a dummy cake, all right? So this would be the real cake, and then you'd have this would be a dummy, because then the client could actually just take this off the top of the cake and just keep this as the wedding cake topper. Because I'm going to do a beautiful arrangement of the flowers I've shown you into this, it's actually easier to be able to push the flowers all directly into a dummy. So of course, if you needed more cake than the 8-inch size or 10 centimeter size cake, the 20 centimeter size cake, you could just have additional cutting cake in the kitchen to suffice the number of guests at the wedding. I've used as a background here, I've actually used the Katy Sue. This is the wood grain effect. All right, so what I actually did there is I made a strip of paper the length of the cake, all right, the top cake, and this is 7.5 centimeters. I rolled out some brown, this is some brown sugar paste or rolled fondant, and then what I did is I went along with this and I just textured it, and I then actually just put this around the side of the cake, so you can see this goes around the side. So this could also be left just like this. If you didn't want to do the cinnamon sticks, you could actually do this just as sort of a rustic basket or a rustic wood container. Of course, there you could actually dust this or paint this if you wanted to, a little bit of color. A little bit of gray on here. Because I'm going to cover this, I don't have to worry about painting it. The reason why I put this on the cake first is that because when we put the cinnamon sticks might have little gaps between them. Think of like almost a floorboard. So we want to make sure when we look through the cinnamon sticks, you have the same color background, okay? And the cinnamon sticks, because the cinnamon sticks will actually sort of sit around the cake here, and they will be a little bit elevated from the top of the cake, so then we'll have a nice arrangement in the top of this. So that is how we would do this. So the cake has been put onto a wooden base. I've used, this is a varnish piece of real wood, and again ties in very nicely to obviously the rustic look. You can of course create this effect, wood grain effect, in rolled fondant or sugar paste, and you could do bark on the edge, but I've used obviously a pre-prepared. This is a food grade product, so this is made to put cheese on or desserts and things like that, so this is totally safe to put the cake on top of. So I'm going to show you in the next step how to obviously arrange the cinnamon sticks and the acorn cups onto the bottom of the cake. So now we're going to move on to attaching the cinnamon sticks and the acorn cups. Now once your cinnamon sticks are dry, they have been dusted and then steamed, and then I've lightly sprayed these with lacquer. You could also brush these with a little bit of vegetable shortening or white fat. Again, this is shown on my winter spice tutorial, and I have the double cinnamon sticks. So when you attach these, this is some of the brown sugar paste rolled fondant I have left from covering the band around the cake that I talked about in the previous segment. And so what I've done there, the two options, you can take a little bit of that softened brown sugar paste or rolled fondant with water. So just using a small spray bottle, you spray a little bit of water into here, and you see then you're going to make a stiff paste. Nice thing about this keeps, so you could just put a lid on this and you could keep this for future use. So that is one option. So basically what you would do is you would take your cinnamon stick, and I would just spread just a little bit of the softened paste. The reason why I'm using the same color as the cinnamon stick is, of course, then if any squashes out, it's not going to be noticeable. That's why I wouldn't use like ivory or white. So you just put a little bit, almost like a chocolate sort of paste, and then you're just going to attach this to around your cake. So I'm just going to start at the back, and these are obviously going to just level out to the cake. And you just will continue with these. And then another alternative, you can use also Super Bond. Super Bond is a strong glue that I use, and you could use piping gel, but this is a little bit thicker than piping gel, so you can take a little bit of Super Bond, and again this is a neutral background, so you can just put a little bit of Super Bond onto here, and then you're going to again just attach this around your So you see this is going to just go around. And so I'm going to now continue with this all the way around to create my cinnamon basket. So now we're just going to finish off. So I've actually, on this particular cake, this is a 4-inch dummy cake, I've used actually 15 double cinnamon sticks, and then I've just made 2 single. Now, of course, I've used a dummy, which is what I recommended. I spoke a little bit about that in the segment where I talked about the top cake, because I'm going to be putting a dome of sugar paste or rolled fondant on here and arranging my flowers. It's easier because I want really to look like a low European style arrangement. So I really want to have a very compact arrangement. So I'm going to be just pushing the wires in. So this is, I would recommend doing as a dummy cake. So of course the thickness of your sugar paste or rolled fondant might vary a little bit, but obviously I'm using a standard 4-inch or 10 centimeter dummy. So I've used, as I said, 15 double, and then I'm just going to finish up with the 2 single ones at the back here. So I could actually get a double in there, but if you made your sugar paste a little thicker or a little thinner, and of course this is the back, so you can just move the last 2 cinnamon sticks a little bit to get that to the size that so that it sort of fits into the space. So here you can see we have created this sort of cinnamon basket or container. So I wanted this sort of rustic look, so I thought the cinnamon sticks would work perfect for this. And I've seen this done actually with real cinnamon sticks, but obviously this is a really nice topper. So we're going to just let those set. I'm going to then move on next to the little acorn cups around the bottom of the cake. So now we're going to move on to the base of the cake. So for this, we're going to use some adorable little acorn cups. And so these have been, again, just follow the directions for the making the acorn on my tutorial. And obviously the acorn cups. I've actually just done those solid. So just press the paste into them and leave them solid. You could also hollow them out. And then I've just dusted those as I've shown on my tutorial. And remember, that's on the full length, that's on the nuts and berries tutorial. So again, you can, just like with the cinnamon sticks, this is actually just the rolled fondant or sugar paste I covered the cake with, just softened with water. So I'm going to now use the same color as the cake, just like I used the brown on the cinnamon sticks. So I've actually put this into a little piping bag, and then you can just pipe a little bit of that onto the base of here. And then again, you're just going to just start at the back here, and just going to attach the, you see these will just sort of sit onto the cake like this. So it's going to just pipe a little bit of, but it just means if any does squash out, it's not going to notice. So again, you want to start at the back of the cake, because when we come around, of course, then you might have to just move the last couple just to sort of fill in the space. It might work perfectly evenly, but also you might end up with a little bit of a gap. So you can just move the last 2 or 3. So you're just going to continue around here. And again, you could also use the Super Bond. So the Super Bond could be taken. Just use a little bit of Super Bond. Remember, this is a very, very thick glue I use for things like isomalt, wafer paper, and things like this. And this is a neutral color, so this can be used as an alternative to the softened fondant or sugar paste. So just going to put a little of these. And see, these are going to go around, so they have this very nice sort of decorative element, and it ties in very nice with the sort of rustic woodland sort of look I'm trying to achieve on this cake. So I'm going to continue with these. So now we're just going to continue with the rest of the acorn cups. So I've actually, on this cake, this is a 8-inch cake, so 40 centimeters. So I've used actually on this 40 acorn cups. So the acorn cups will go around. You can see it creates a very nice sort of rustic look for the cake. Now we're going to move on to the top of the cake. So when you're ready to put the flowers in, you don't want to do this until you've got the flowers ready, you've got them dusted, ready to go. So what I do is I have 100 grams here, or 4 ounces approximately, of sugar paste rolled fondant. I colored this very similar color to the color I used on the acorn caps. So it's a little bit of cream and a little bit of green. So it's almost like a pale khaki color. It just ties in tonal with it. It's going to represent almost like a moss base for the basket. So what I've done is I've just flattened it out into a sort of a pad, and I've made it almost a bit like a mushroom cap. So you see it's obviously got that dome like the top of a mushroom. So what I'm going to now do is just going to take a little bit of either edible glue or some piping gel. I'm just going to put that onto the top of the cake. Now, as I explained twice already in the tutorial, this I would recommend you do as a dummy cake, this top part, this 4" or 10 centimeter, because I'm going to be pushing, there's a lot of flowers to go in this because I want a very low compact arrangement. And if you were doing this as a real cake, it would mean that from a safety perspective, you have to put, everything has to go into straws or into holders. And so by doing a dummy, and it means then the client, the customer, can just take this off of the top cake and then obviously keep this as a beautiful sugar flower arrangement as a memento of the wedding or celebration. So what I've done is I've made this cap, and you're just going to sort of thin it out so it's about approximately the size we need. It's going to go onto the top here, like so. And then just using my Dresden tool here, I'm just going to sort of just push this to the edges. So I'm just going to use my Dresden tool here. Just because we've just put the cinnamon sticks on, just sort of push this, just hold your cinnamon sticks with your hand. I'm just going to push this to the edge, because we want this really to represent almost like a sort of a moss in the top of a basket. So you see how I'm just going to do this, like this. Alright, and then it looks almost like the top of a pie. Then I'm going to texture this, so I'm just using a toothbrush. You can also use a nail brush here. So just going to go over the surface of this. And what this is going to do is going to create this sort of almost like a sort of a moss effect. Remember, we don't want to do this until you're ready to put the sugar flowers into place, okay? So pretty much you could have all of your cinnamon sticks, your acorn cups pre-made, and then you can just have your sugar flowers, obviously make all your sugar flowers, have those pre-made, and you're just going to just texture this. And this is just going to give you sort of a textural detail, so you're going to get this slightly mossy effect. Another way you can do that is you can use a grass piping tip or tube, like a 233 tip or piping tube, and you can actually take like green royal icing and you could pipe over the top of cream or white sugar paste as well. But we're really not going to see this. It's just that if you look through the flowers, you don't want to see the top of the cream cake in position. So this is going to represent the moss, and you can see we have this slight dome, which is going to be almost the shape of the arrangement we're going to put in the top. So the next step is going to be putting the flowers into here. So once we're ready to put the flowers in, first of all, I have used just a little small stick. Now we're thinking of almost like a triangle. So all of the main components that are going to go into this arrangement are like 3 ferns, 3 roses, 3 hydrangeas. And so we're going to be doing groups of 3s. So if you think about the clock face, this is the back of the cake here. So this is like 12 o'clock, all right? So what I've done is about 2.5 centimeters, so about 1 inch in from the edge on the green. I've made a hole here. I'm then going to think about the clock face coming round to about 4 o'clock, all right? And then I've also done another one at around 7 o'clock. So as you can see, what I've done is I've made a sort of a triangle of. And remember, this is a cake dummy, that is what I'd recommend. So you obviously need to just go in with your small stick just to go through the rolled fondant or sugar paste on the top. Now, these are the first 3 components I'm going to put in are going to be my ferns. So these are the ferns that have got the obviously end, and then I have 2 small fronds and 2 medium fronds. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my pair of pliers and I'm going to bend them directly at the bottom of where the medium ones meet at a right angle. So they would just come down at a right angle here. So you can see you've got a right angle there. And this is then going to be cut to about 3 to 4 centimeters in length. So this will give me so you can see here we have the wire here, and this wire is going to be what we're going to use for the ferns. Taking a pair of pliers, we're then going to take these, and this is going to be pushed in. Right, you want to push this in so this actually comes in, and you see how then it's going to sort of almost like come like a waterfall effect. So you can actually sort of just gently bend the fern down, and we're going to take your 3 ferns, and your 3 ferns will go into the basket here. And then we can just obviously arrange these. So these are going to form our foundation. 1, 2, 3. So these will go into the holes here. I've got this cake on a low turntable, so this just makes it a little bit easier to. You see, this is the front of the cake here. So obviously, as I said, we're working in a triangle, okay? Now, generally, when we are doing a flower arrangement, if this was a real cinnamon stick basket and this was moss in the top of it and you had floral foam in the bottom, you're normally going to build up your foundation first. So we're going to build the foundation. So going to take some of my filler. So we're going to use some of the little pine needles. All right, so I'm going to just sort of put these around the edge. And I'm just going to put these in small, and I don't need to worry about making a hole for these because these are just going to come into the side here like this. You see how I'm just going to cut these off fairly short, just about 2.5 centimeters long. And I'm just going to put these around the edge here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do just like 3 of these in between each of the ferns. All right, so then we're going to put the third, so these are going to give us our 3 groups of pine needles around the top here. And then I'm going to take some of my pine groupings. So these are actually groupings of 2 small pine cones, which is following my tutorial, which you can see a full-length tutorial making pine cones and the pine needles on Katy Sue on the YouTube. And so what I've done here is I'm just going to bend these an angle here, and I've just made some holes, just literally about centimeter, about 1/3 of an inch or so after coming in towards the center. So these are actually going to be bent at a right angle here, and then these are going to actually sit. So these will come out where at the top of the where the ferns will go. All right, so these will go out from where the leatherleaf fern is going to go. But you see, because when we look through this, we're going to see this background paste. That's why you want to have this like moss effect. Because if we, plus also having this like dome of sugar paste or rolled fond that enables us to be able to have a foundation. And so you're just going to push this in. So these are going to go in fairly compact to fairly tight into the cake here. And you see how your pine cones will go in like this. So again, we're following this sort of triangle. So remember, this is actually the front of the cake here. All right, so this is the front of the cake, and then we have the 12 o'clock, the 4 o'clock approximately, and 7 o'clock. So these will go into position like this. So now we're going to move on to, I've already done 2 sections here. So I'm going to take some of my purple berries. So remember this particular color, this violet purple, ultraviolet is the 2018 Pantone color of the year. So this is going to be a very influential color. So I thought it'd be fun just to give a little bit of pop of color to this rustic basket with a trend color. So these are made just exactly the same way as the holly berries. And so what I've done here is I have 2, 2, and 2. So here I'm working, remember, most of the things we're making are going to be done in 3, so I've got like 3 clusters of hydrangeas, 3 roses, and then some of the things we have in, for example, in the case of the berries, I have here 2 berries, 2 berries, 2 berries. But you can see here we've got the berries that are going to go here. Okay, so you see the berries are almost coming just to sort of the edge, just sitting over the 2 outside pieces of pine. So you have 2, 2, 2. Then we're going to place the hydrangea cluster. Now the hydrangea clusters are a group of 3 hydrangeas, so almost like a sort of a triangle shape, you can see. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to almost like make them so it's almost like a curve shape, because these are going to sit on the edge of the basket. When you put sugar flowers together like this, there are many ways you can do it. On the base of this cake board, I'm actually going to do a wired spray, which I'll be showing you a little bit later in this presentation. And that is more of a floristry wiring technique. This is more of a flower arranging technique. But this would be the technique that would be used, a floral designer or florist would do into floral foam. You'd have moss. So very much we're emulating what you would do with fresh flowers. So you see how I bent this at a right angle. And then again, I'm just going to cut this. And then I'm just going to press this into, it's just making holes usually is the best way to go, because it will just give you a foundation here. Don't press this in too hard, because you can also, you see how these are just going to be arranged on the top edge of the basket. So you see how they're going to now sit on the top edge of the basket here, like so. So this is going to see how we're filling out the foundation. And then we're going to be working next into the center area, and then we're going to be working with the roses. So now we're going to move on to the next step, which I've already done part of this. That is, we're going to, behind the hydrangea, I'm going to put another small, just a single piece of pine needles. These are going to help to sort of fluff out, because once we get this all together, we will be able to use our tweezers and just fluff that out just a little bit, and just move things as needed. And then we have obviously the 2 pine cones already taped in here. So I'm going to now take 3 single pine cones. These are small sized pine cones. And actually just going to pop those in directly behind the pine here. Now it's going to get a little bit tight in the middle here. And obviously you need to make sure that, you know, when you're doing this, you generally sort of work in like, so you do your 3 pine needles, then your 3 pine cones. So they will go into there like so. Then we're going to put the berry. All right, so we're going to actually do a berry. So the berry is going to go in the sort of behind the, so actually in between the sort of pine needles, in between pine needles and the pine cones. So we'll have the, as you can see here, you have the purple berry is going to sit there, there, and there. And so this is going to bring the purple accent up onto the top of the cake here. Just going to push this in. So you see how it balances the purple on the top beautifully. We're going to put a medium pine cone. This is going to sit right in the middle, okay? So we're going to actually sort of sit the medium pine cone. It's going to go right in the middle. It's more really, and you just push that right down. It's just more that when we look into the top of this, you're not going to see the sort of the moss. You're going to sort of just have this covered. So that's going to go in fairly low because it actually will sit just below the, obviously, level of the roses, okay? So you're just going to have your pieces in here. And just best thing to do is to use tweezers. So obviously if you need to move anything, just going to use your tweezers, but just going to make sure you're probably going to get a little bit of sugar on the top of your cake. This is just coming off the pine needles. And then pretty much the last thing we're going to do is to just going to put the roses in. So obviously we're going to now have the 3 iceberg roses. So you see how these are going to fit into the top. But this, as I said, is forming a very compact arrangement. So if you think about a fresh flower arrangement, and that is why this is the best choice for this style of arrangement. I sometimes wire flowers, which I'm going to be showing on the baseboard, into more of a bouquet. You could do a posy or nosegay, which is a name for this sort of half dome shape. But because it's a very tight arrangement, this is much easier to actually arrange the flowers individually. Now the very last thing we will do would be to put the roses in. All right, now you have to be a little bit careful with the roses because obviously the outside petals of your roses are a little bit vulnerable. All right, so just be very, very careful when you start to put them in. Make sure that you have holes ready for those to go into. And when you do the roses, you're going to come in from the side. Now the last rose is a little bit more difficult because this obviously has to go into here. All right, and so you're just going to just very carefully push this in. I've made a hole into there. And just going to just bring your rose in, all right? And your rose needs to come down fairly low into the flowers. All right, so it creates this nice compact arrangement. Now you're going to just use your tweezers here, and just with your tweezers, you'll just fluff your, and this is the lovely thing about the sort of the pine needles here, because you can see you can actually just sort of fluff those, and you can fill these in amongst your flowers, all right? And just get rid of your sugar. So this is the topper for my rustic wedding cake. And as you can see, beautiful complementary colors. So obviously the green gives a little bit of freshness. The purple is a pop of color, which obviously, as I said, is a trend color. But of course, you could also do orange berries. If you're doing this more in the sort of winter time, you could do orange berries or red berries as well. But I decided to do a little pop of color, which is always a sort of surprise element. And if a bride was using maybe this color for a wedding this year, for bridesmaids and things like that, this will give a beautiful accent of that color. And so next I'm going to move on to show you how to do a wired spray, which is going to actually be used just to go alongside the cake, maybe on the cake table. Now we're going to do a wired spray, so I'm going to use the same flower components I have in the topper of the wedding cake, and I'm going to do a wired spray which could be used as an accent on the table. You could also make a smaller version of this maybe for a cake server or knife spray, which is something I often do to balance the color. So first of all, I have this is a slightly larger leatherleaf fern. So this has got obviously the end part. It has 2 small, 2 medium, 2 large of the fronds. And I'm going to start off first of all with a medium pine cone. So my medium pine cone is just going to go into here. Now these stems we've got fairly long because we're going to do this more like a wired spray. So you see here we have the leatherleaf fern. But you can see if you were doing just like sort of a birthday cake, just like a rose and a leatherleaf fern, how beautiful they use as a sort of presentation. All right, so this is obviously a very nice fern to use for obviously with roses. So we take the pine cone, I've just bent that up at a slight angle. That's just going to sort of sit on top of the fern. I'm using here half-width light green floral tape. In a situation like this, because we have some things are done with brown, like the pine cones, the berries, those are in brown, the hydrangeas, roses, and ferns are in light green. You could use either light green or brown for your wiring. So this is more of a sort of floristry technique. So we're going to just sort of start taping, and I'm using half-width floral tape. So I've just cut the floral tape in half using a tape cutter, and so we're using half-width tape. And so I've added this. I'm going to take in a berry. The berry I'm going to just bring up as a slight angle, so it's just going to sit beside the pine cone, the medium pine cone. I'm going to come around here. Then I'm going to take my spray of hydrangeas. Again, I'm going to just sort of take my hydrangea here. Where they naturally meet, I'm going to bend them up at a right angle. So you see how they're just going to sort of sit into this sort of arrangement. Now, putting together sugar flowers, the difference between obviously sugar flowers and fresh flowers is fresh flowers are a lot more sort of durable as far as like when they touch each other. So you just have to be a little bit careful. But as I said, using a pair of tweezers, you see how you can actually just sort of use your tweezers here to sort of bend everything nicely into position. I'm going to just add some, intermittent places. I'm going to just add some pine needles. So you see, I'm just going to stick a pine needle there just between the hydrangea. So this just sort of fills in space. I'm going to come down here. Just going to come down a little bit further here. Now I'm going to put in another berry. So I'm going to cover another berry. So I'm going to put this in, coming in onto, as I'm looking at it on the right hand side here. You see how it's going to come up straight. So we're just going to add a berry here on this side. But this is an optional. I mean, of course, the wedding cake looks beautiful just with the topper. But as I explained, a lot of times when I'm doing a wedding, I would sometimes do like an accent spray to go on the cake table. Or you see, you could actually just like, if you left this like this, and then actually attach this with a zip tie to a knife server, a cake knife or a cake server, this would look beautiful on the table. And then when the bride and groom hold this, you're going to have the accent from the top of the wedding cake. But especially with a strong color like this purple, it's a nice way to balance, obviously balance the color in the photographs and on the table. So once we get the knife spray like this, or spray like this, we're going to then add in the rose. So when I put the rose in, I'm actually going to take the rose here. It's going to sort of bend this at an angle. And so then the rose will actually sort of sit into position here. So the rose will go into the spray like this. Just make sure that that sort of sits into place. All right, so this is going to sort of sit into, remember, rose is fairly heavy, so you just need to make sure you've got hold of this when you wire this into position, because we obviously don't want any drama with obviously you breaking this or dropping it. So just make sure that you tape round a few times to secure. Keep your tape nice and tight. That is also why we're using half width floral tape rather than full width floral tape. But you see, the hydrangeas work really well because you actually can take the hydrangeas with your fingers or your tweezers, and see, then you can actually sort of bend them. They almost sit in flat. They're going to look more aesthetically more attractive in that position. When we come around here now, so now we're going to think of this almost like really a little miniature bouquet. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put in some, so I'm going to use the two little pine cones here at the side. So I'm going to use, this is two small pine cones like I used on the cake. So those will just sort of sit into the side here. Now you could, with both the spray on the top of the cake and obviously also this spray here, you could use ribbons. These are sort of like rustic ribbons. This is made with burlap or hessian type of products. There are many different of these style ribbons you can use. And then you can also use, for example, this is like a wired, like a string, but this also could be used as accents. So a lot of times in fresh floral arrangements, sometimes you'll see ribbon used. I'm doing this arrangement in a more organic way, where I want really just the flowers to be the sort of the showstopper and to shine. But if you have limited time, the thing is, ribbons are an excellent way to fill in space. So then we're going to just add some other pine needles. So you see how I'm just sort of extending the pine needles out from the side here as well. So you see how the pine needles will come out. And so these I've got on sort of longish wires here. It's also a good idea sometimes if you're working on a spray like this, have a piece of foam or a towel just to lay that down on. I'm just going to wire this, just continue to tape down a little further. And of course also when you come to put things in, if you find your stems too short, you just take another wire, like a 24 gauge wire, just to make it a little bit longer if you need to extend the length of the wire. This is all, I always tell my students, you know, putting flowers together like this does take practice. Things you can do to practice would be using silk flowers. You can practice with silk flowers. That's a good way to have an understanding of how your sugar flowers will work. Also, if you do a flower spray like this with silk flowers, first you'll have an idea about sort of how many roses or components you have. So you see how I've sort of balanced that with the as I said, pine. So that sort of pine looks really, really nice and so easy to make if you follow my tutorial. But it's a great filler. And of course I've done in this cake, because I'm doing a winter theme, I've used the sugar on here, as I show on my tutorial. But of course you could also do this in autumn time. You could just use this without the sugar on as a filler. You can see how the pine works very, very well there. Just going to bring out these needles here. I'm then going to bring in my third berry, and this berry I'm having sort of coming in the opposite direction. So this is really what we refer to as a return. So you see this berry comes down in this direction here. And this is going to finish off the spray. And I'm just going to bring this in. See, I'm just going to bring my berry around here. My knife's up here. So you'll have this nice spray. And as I said, this is going to be used as an accent just onto the cake board, just to finish this off. So I'm going to just tape down here. Just going to continue with a little bit more tape. And then once I've continued down here a little way, I'm now going to cut off all of these wires. Okay, so you're going to use your wire cutters here. Now this is a fairly substantial amount of wire, so just going to cut that through. Just be careful with that. And then what we're going to do is you're going to actually wrap the floral tape around the stem here, like so. And you can just break that off or cut it with scissors. So you see how I've continued past, and then you're just going to like fold this over. So what you're actually doing is you're almost like a bandage. You're actually sort of making sure you don't have exposed wires on the end, because you don't want your customer or client to pick obviously these up and then push a wire into their finger. You see how you're just going to just now take the little spray, all right, and then again you can just use your, on something like the berries, they're on fairly thick wires because we have 3 wires, 1 wire on each berry. So you're going to just use your pliers here to move those around. On smaller things like on your pine needles, you can use your here, you can use your tweezers, and then you of course can on your hydrangea use your tweezers as shown. So here we have the small spray. All right, so this small spray will go as an accent for our cake. So here you can see the finished wedding cake I have on a pedestal stand. This elevates the cake up and just gives more presence and height to the cake. Then we will take the small spray. This is the spray, and you see this is going to balance the color. So this small spray will just be placed. Now this could just be physically placed onto the cake, or you could insert this into the cake. All right, if this was obviously a real cake, you would use a straw or a flower pick, bend the wire at a right angle and insert that in so it will be stable. But it is also going to be fine just sort of right left onto there. And it just gives a nice natural balance of color, and so obviously finishes off this, as I said, rustic winter wedding. So first of all, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and then we'll have fun using obviously the Nicholas Lodge collection molds from Katy Sue Designs. So this has been Nicholas Lodge. Until next time, happy decorating and sweet wishes.